Hey there folks, Rel here. Today we're taking a look at battle rifles, a weapon that has been repeatedly tweaked over the past year and feels more solid now than it ever has. Battle rifles are long-range semi-automatic weapons that can put the hurt on enemies in a support capacity and hold their own at most ranges, provided the user has good aim. Each faction has access to one battle rifle. It's the AMR-66 for the Terran Republic, the Warden for the New Conglomerate, and the Eidolon for the Vanu Sovereign. Each rifle is statistically the same except for the Eidolon, which lacks bullet drop, and is honestly the only VS infantry weapon that actually makes good use of the feature. You can pick up a battle rifle for 250 certs or 500 station cash, and it's available to both your engineer and your heavy assault classes. Battle rifles deal 250 damage up to 8 meters and drop off to 225 damage at 75 meters. And as you can probably tell, that is huge damage at extremely long ranges, and the damage drop-off is extremely low. If you're within 8 meters of your target, you're going to kill them in 4 shots or 2 headshots, but beyond that you're going to be dealing with a 5-shot kill range, or 6 shots at the very most if the enemy is using nanoweave armor. Against infiltrators at any range, it's a 4-shot kill by default, or 2 headshots, so counter-sniping with this weapon is extremely effective. Where the weapon lacks, and understandably so, is in the rate of fire department. Your battle rifle fires at 333 rounds per minute, even though the chamber time statistic that's listed in-game says that it chambers at 0.9 seconds. I think that's wrong, it doesn't make any sense. But in order to work this weapon effectively at range, you're going to be firing a little bit slower to deal with both the recoil and the cone of fire bloom, which we'll talk about later. If you're interested in a flat theoretical time to kill, I've listed the calculations in the description below, but honestly those numbers are going to be somewhat off the mark in actual practice, so I didn't want to use them here. Battle rifles have a mediocre muzzle velocity of 500 meters per second, but they also have access to high velocity ammo, and here's a side-by-side example of the travel time both with and without HVA. Not a huge difference, but at extremely long range, every bit helps. And not to mention, HVA is excellent at bumping out the minimum damage range. The most challenging aspect of the battle rifle, in my opinion, is the limited magazine and reserve ammunition. Battle rifles have 20 rounds per magazine and 100 ammo in reserve, so theoretically you could be looking at about 4 kills per magazine, but this is not how things work. You miss shots, you hit people in the leg, heavy assaults use overshields, multiple enemies show up at one time. It's a mess. It's PlanetSide 2. So using a weapon with so little flexibility requires a very different kind of playstyle than most other weapons will allow. Because of the low magazine and ammo counter, I don't usually run battle rifles on my heavy assault, but heavy assaults can use this weapon a lot more effectively at closer ranges than the engineer class by using their overshields as a sort of buffer. Engineers, on the other hand, can restock their own ammo, they can deploy cover in the form of a turret, and they can provide aid to allies who are on the outskirts of a battle. In other words, they're a really great support class, and this weapon fits right in. Battle rifles reload in 2.5 seconds short and 3.4 seconds long, so it's a moderate reload time provided you don't waste all 20 rounds in your magazine. You should be reloading often so that this weapon is always topped off. The cone of fire is good while aiming down sights and moving, but it really shines when you're standing still or when you're crouching. The hip fire, on the other hand, is moderate to poor, and it really requires a laser sight to give it any sort of viability. The cone of fire bloom values are also pretty high, but can be dealt with easily, provided you aren't spamming the trigger. Battle rifles all recoil up and to the right. On most weapons you can compensate for the recoil, but on battle rifles it's a much different animal. You can still counter the recoil to a degree by dragging down and to the left, but since the battle rifle is a semi-auto weapon with heavy vertical recoil, your weapon is going to jump a good amount after each squeeze of the trigger. At closer ranges you can spam the trigger a little bit more, but to stay accurate over range, the best way to deal with the heavy recoil is to take a single shot and let the weapon settle. Now in this footage you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. On the left hand side I'm pacing my shots, and on the right hand side I'm trying to compensate for the recoil using traditional methods while spamming the trigger. Now you don't need to wait for a long time to retain your accuracy, it's just a blink longer than the weapon's normal rate of fire, and waiting for that brief time is going to let the weapon center, it's going to give you another near perfect shot on target, and that's what you want. So that was kind of dipping into the weapon-specific strategy side of things, so before we talk too much about that, let's go over the attachment options and then give you some recommendations on which to consider. Battle rifles have access to scopes 1x through 6x, including night vision and 2x scopes, and they have a compensator, a flash suppressor, a standard suppressor, forward grip, laser sight, and flashlight, and of course high velocity ammo. For scope selection, this truly comes down to your personal preference, as well as the distance at which you're fighting. I personally feel most comfortable with the 4x crosshair reticules, except on the NC's Warden, because the NC are the only faction that have access to a 3.4x crosshair reticule, so that's the one that I tend to gravitate towards on the Warden. If you're really using this weapon at range though, the 4x and even the 6x scopes are very useful, and the 2x and the night vision scopes are great if you want to work the weapon a little bit more easily in close quarters engagements. Throughout this video you can see me running a variety of different attachments, but there is one setup that I keep coming back to. I run a flash suppressor, a laser sight, and high velocity ammo. I don't like to use the compensator on the battle rifle. I think that it's helpful, but it's far from necessary. It's going to help you stay a little bit more accurate while spamming as the vertical recoil is lowered, but at the ranges where you can spam this weapon, I feel like you can do just as well without the compensator in the first place, and at longer ranges you're more likely to be pacing your shots. The main reason I stay away from the compensator and gravitate toward the flash suppressor is concealment. With a compensator attached, enemies will see you appear as a little red dot on the minimap out to 80 meters, but will only see a red dot at 40 meters without one. But at any range you're going to be noticing a muzzle flash like nobody's business, and this is the reason that I latch onto the flash suppressor so heavily. Concealment at range. It also helps you fight at night because your own muzzle flash isn't obscuring your view. I don't normally go with a suppressor primarily because of the bullet velocity decrease, which is drastic while fighting at a distance. If you think you had a hard time landing shots due to bullet drop from the start, you will definitely have a terrible time landing them with a suppressor attached. Even if you play Vonu Sovereign and don't have to worry about bullet drop, the velocity decrease is still enough to make shots difficult to land on moving targets. The upside to using a suppressor is that a battle rifle loses very little in the way of damage range, so at closer ranges there's probably no harm in running a suppressor if you want to stay off the radar. The downsides that come with a flash suppressor basically do not exist on a battle rifle, because this weapon just simply is not meant to be spammed, and even if you do spam the trigger, it's only going to take a handful of shots to drop your target, and that'll happen before your cone of fire becomes much of a problem. The flash suppressor is just such a solid choice that it wouldn't make sense not to use it unless you're really having trouble in other areas, and of course this is my personal preference. The laser sight is also very powerful on this weapon. The hip fire by itself is pretty pathetic, but with a laser sight attached there's a noticeable increase in its effectiveness. This single attachment basically gives you the ability to use the weapon in close quarters without fear of getting caught off guard. You always want to aim down sights when you can, of course, but in dire straits, this attachment makes all of the difference. The forward grip, on the other hand, is another attachment that is not particularly necessary, just like the compensator. It's going to help with spamming, but the difference isn't really noticeable. In fact, if you decide not to use a forward grip, you're going to be getting a really quirky and interesting benefit that we'll talk about later. High velocity ammo should be a given on the battle rifle to not only make up for the weapon's mediocre muzzle velocity, but also to add just that little bit more oomph to your shots outside of the 65 meter mark. The downsides of HVA, just like the flash suppressor, basically do not exist if you're pacing your shots, but you might notice the vertical recoil increase if you're spamming. That said, let's talk about the weapon-specific strategies that make the battle rifle such an interesting and powerful tool. The first thing is patience, and like we mentioned earlier, with controlling your recoil, you want to try and let the gun settle after each shot, and that does not take long at all. But on top of that, you also want to actually take the time to aim, and this is the hardest thing for me to do in combat. As soon as I turn around or see a target, bullets just kind of happen, hopefully in the target's general direction. But that behavior, at least with this type of weapon, gets me killed so much more often than taking a moment to line up proper shots will. If you seriously practice patience with this weapon, it's going to drop enemies left and right. In the same vein, another thing that you want to avoid doing while running a battle rifle is oversampling it. And this basically means that you're clicking faster than the weapon's actual rate of fire will let you, and because of it, you're losing out on possible rate of fire in the process. I did do a video on this a while back, and I was using battle rifles and pistols as examples specifically, so it's worth checking out if you have not seen it already. There's good information there, and the link is in the description below. The third tip is headshots, and I know that sounds obvious, but you want to lead with a headshot if you can, and then if things get frantic, you can drag down and kick out rounds consistently toward the body. That first shot can be a deciding factor in run-of-the-mill combat, but is even more important when it comes to countering enemy infiltrators before they realize that they're taking damage and run off and reposition. I also think it goes without saying, but due to the low rate of fire and lack of ammo, you want to try and keep this thing out of close quarters if possible. It's not terrible at taking down single enemies, but you can easily find yourself in a bad situation. Pistols are generally more reliable here, so make sure that you have a good sidearm equipped. For the TR, I run the Inquisitor because 30 rounds in a magazine and a high rate of fire is basically an SMG in your pocket. On the NC, I run the Desperado. It's arguably one of the best pistols in the entire game. And for the VS, I opt to use the Underboss or the Commissioner to set up 2-shot plus knife combos. If you're a heavy assault, there's a lot more leeway available to you, but generally speaking, this is not a great weapon for close quarters combat. The last funny little tip that I want to share with you is using the weapon's recoil pattern to your extreme advantage. If an enemy is running left to right, specifically, you can practically spam the trigger because your weapon is going to kick to the right just enough to keep landing your shots on target, or at the very least, close to being on target. Attaching a forward grip actually removes this benefit to a degree because the weapon loses just enough of its kick to the right. And it's not a solid strategy, but it is something interesting that I think you'll notice while playing more with this weapon. Overall, battle rifles are probably the strongest non-sniping weapon in the game for ranged combat right now, and they are extremely inexpensive as well. There are some recoil management techniques to learn and a drastic shift in playstyle to cope with, but if you can get used to the weapon, your engineer and to a lesser degree your heavy assault are going to find a tool that brings something very unique to the table. If this video has been interesting, helpful, or entertaining, please feel free to like, subscribe, tell your friends about the channel, and if you have any helpful tips or insight that you'd like to offer about the battle rifle, definitely share that in the comment section down below. How do you feel that the battle rifle is performing right now, since the update? Did you pick it up recently, or are you planning to? Let's hear it. Thanks very much, folks. We're all signing off.